So hello and welcome here to this MPM introduction in Houdini, and you might have seen the end result on the YouTube channel, and we want to go over the creation of this effect. But first of all, let's make clear what MPM actually is and what the pros and cons are from this solver inside of Houdini. So here I'm in Gemini and I asked Gemini to evaluate what an MPM solver is, what it's best for, its pros and cons for the solver in Houdini. And it gave a pretty great description, like it's a material point method solver, which is a physics simulation tool and is bridging the gap between particle-based methods like Lagrangian particles and grid-based methods like Eulerian and volumes. And what is MPM best for? It's uniquely designed for elastoplastic, clumpy, and multi-physics material. Specifically materials that seamlessly change phase or break apart, which means that you can simulate different states of materials with one solver. Like you have here snow and ice cream. This is the industry gold standard. For snow, it naturally handles a snow plow compressing snow into hard chunks, or an avalanche starting as a solid sheet and fracturing into powder. MPM is very good for mud, soil, and slush, materials that are half solid and half liquid. When you want to do complex destruction without hand fracturing with the Voronoi nodes in Houdini, you can mix material interactivity, yellow cubes, splash of water, and mud all crashing into each other in the exact same solver natively interacting. It's introduced as a GPU accelerated tool in modern Houdini versions 20.5 and refined in Houdini 21. Today we just had the presentation of Houdini 22, and you can expect some nice Houdini 22 tutorials within the next days here on Industrial Digital Alchemy. And the pros of the MPM solver is that it's using native multi-physics. You don't need complex constraint networks to make different materials talk to each other. No prefactoring required. It's GPU accelerated. So the big point on MPM solver simulations is that you need a fairly high VRAM loaded graphics card for the OpenCL evaluation. That means that you can work on a 2080 RTX, but also on a 3090, 4090, and also 5090 card. Here in this presentation, we are using a 5090 card from NVIDIA, and it's showing some very interesting speed facts and also limitations to the VRAM. The cons of MPM is that, like I said, it has massive VRAM consumption. It heavily relies on the GPU. They require an enormous amount of video RAM. It will fall back to the grid rebuilding on the CPU when the VRAM is running out of memory. It's slow on highly rigid materials. That means that materials which are very high in density, like steel, iron, concrete, and stuff like that, they take longer. in the calculation because they have a higher stiffness in their material properties, and therefore it needs more sub-steps, causing simulation times to skyrocket. You have this lack of microcontrol. This means that in rigid body dynamics you can control exactly when a constraint breaks via vecs or attributes, and with MPM you're relying heavily on global physical equations. It can be harder to art direct an exact artistic frame or specific break pattern. I mean, this is something that is off to the artist. For the example, I think there is a lot of art directable control inside the MPM Solver. So let's see how this scene was created. So back in Houdini, we can see here that actually the scene was created with the car mud example. To enter this, hit tab on your keyboard and enter configure. And here we have the spinning tire test, and you see that it's pretty much identical in the setup. That means that you can follow up this tutorial on your own very good and very quickly. So let's delete this again and let's see what's going on here in the simulation of the scene. So it all starts with our box where we define the size and the scale of our scene and make sure that our spaceship, which is coming up from the ground there, is matching the scene field of our MPM simulation here. We then gonna create and source SDF a sign distance field, which is pretty much here the volume representation of our box. And we can then see that in the mud SDF we get those little holes and fractured ground parts here, which we can drive with the noise density here. So when we gonna enter some different values here, like 4, then you can see how the noise pattern is changing. So you can auto-direct pretty much how your mud and your water field should look like. And this is what's then piped into an density to SDF. And from there we go back to our sub level here. There's then this VDB combine, and you can see how there the water MPM source is created. We have here this MPM container. The MPM container is created over here. And there we have a particle separation of 0.007. And this is what makes the water particles stick fairly close together. We then have here the mud MPM source. This is creating our mud field where the water is sitting inside. You can see here we have here the water patterns and we have here the mud patterns, and this goes into a merge node. And then you can see that we have here the muddy part and there's the water part. And from there we have here also the material properties like I described in the introduction. That means that we have here a preset of water with a liquid behavior and a density of 1000. You can definitely play with the density adjustments here to make it more thicker or thinner, water-like. You will, as you see that also in the end result, that the water is behaving a bit in another way like the mud is doing, because you can see here mud is set to viscous, so it's very thickly and has a density of 1250. We have here the water, which is 1000, so it should actually act in a different way. So inside here we can rename this to ship import, and this is where our spaceship is pretty much coming from. It's here in a read node and then goes into a transform node, and you can see here this is the or it's my version of the Rulon Forces spaceship from Dino Riders, which is coming out of the mud there. Pretty nice and detailed chip. And this is going into an output. And from there, we pretty much do a transform of this ship, moving from the ground up into the air. There are two keyframes. One is at 01 in the translate node here, and the last one is at 3. And you can see how our ship is also making this little glide. The ship is rotating here at the y-axis, and you can see how it's making this slide when it's coming up off the ground. We then have here our ship parameters, and it's animated, it's rigid, it has a voxel size of 0003, and you can see when I go to the voxel representation, it's quite detailed but not as heavy as expected. And it's then going into a rest node to create the rest attribute for the later motion blur and texturing. And we have also the MPM container here. This is our domain, which comes also from the box above here. So the MPM container only calculates inside of this domain here, which means that, like I said in the beginning, MPM uses this grid-based calculation method. That means that you are actually limited to a certain size of simulation space, because it's all requiring resources and VRAM, RAM, CPU power and all the stuff. So it then goes down into our solver here, and inside of the MPM solver I'm using a time scale of 0.5. We have here gravity, we have the air drag of 1, and I'm also using some surface tension here, which is point based, and the strength is 0.1, and we go later to the collision state. I also want to output velocity. I want to output the p-scale, the age, color, CD, the UVs, and the name of our particles. And once this is set up, everything, we can cache it out to disk. And this is what our cache pretty much looks like. We have here in the beginning this spreading out because we have no collision container. You can use a collision container to make the shape of your MPM simulation more or less static. That means that it's not flowing around, and you can see how the ship is coming down, and here we have all those simulation dynamics happening. And what I did then was doing an isolation. So I isolated the water with the source name water surface, and here source name mud density. So I have now my mud and my water pretty much separated from each other. And then we go into the MPM surface, which makes a mesh out of our MPM particles. So we have here VDB from particles. We have a polygon mesh, and the same with the mud. We have here attribute list, also our rest and color. And we have here rest and color. And this is then going into a merge node where everything is merged together. And you can see how this is then acting as a surface operator on our meshed particles. So here we have now this more or less liquid look, the mud and the water. And what I then also did was putting our ship here to the different elements for the later texturing. That was done with a blast node, center hull, front detail, front guns, and we have here the rear wings. And this is needed for Solaris, for the Karma environment, to make the texturing more easy. What I did then was adding here in our water environment a facet and post-compute the normals. In our attribute wrangle, I'm using a vector n equals point from input 1 of the normal of the point numbers. And with that approach, I'm able to map the liquid UVs on the water. And therefore you can see here that it's now meshed and UV calculated for the later texturing. The same is done for the water and the same is done for the mud mesh. And that means that you get more UV information inside of your MPM simulation. Right, so I think that was it for the first part. I will later in the second part jump into the stage context and show you how all this was shaded and how all the vegetation was created inside of Houdini. And I hope you enjoyed the first chapter here the same as I did. If you have questions, just comment or give it a like and subscribe, and we can here see that our simulation is now at a very interesting state. And like I mentioned, the second part will be up very soon, which is the stage where we lighten and where we render everything. Yeah, that will be very soon. Thanks a lot.